Привit moi Jersey. Hello my friends, my name is Darren Gerdes. I'm a professor who's been trying to help you understand what's going on in Ukraine. Over the last week or so, I've spent a lot of time talking about the Republicans in the United States and their support for Ukraine. So for example, I had this one where Tucker Carlson had asked a handful of Republicans to answer questions. And then after Ron DeSantis gave his particular point of view, and DeSantis is kind of the alternative to Trump, front runner, as most people are thinking about it, there were more Republicans who had a backlash against DeSantis's comments because they were kind of a little bit more toward Trump than what we were hoping for. And then I had this conversation with Georgie where I unpacked some of this, and then I also talked about here Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene showing video of them saying what they were saying. I'm going to put this topic to rest at least for a while, and I don't engage in anything that's not related to Ukraine, okay? So I'm just going to say that right up front. And by the way, please, if you see comments and you've been around on my channel for some time, just gently remind people if they just going into a diatribe on either side. And I almost always correct the conservatives. I usually ignore the liberals who will go into a diatribe. But I generally chastise conservatives and say, this isn't what we're about. We're here to support Ukraine. Okay, so please help me with that. I'd appreciate it very much. Okay, so here's what I want to talk about. I believe that there's far more conservative Republican support than you think for Ukraine. Okay, now here's what I'm saying. Let me start with this. This was just Paul Massaro just came out with this, and he was talking about polling about Republican support, and it depends on how you ask the poll question whether it shows that they're really for that or what they're thinking. And I'll show you what I mean in just a moment. But I want to play this little bit from him, just 2 minutes of conversation where he's talking about, there's two items here: American support generally and then Republican support. Here we go.
But it's very strange, I think, with the USA, in that the longer this goes on, it seems the deeper the USA digs in. I mean, and I think that is also kind of, one might find a historical trait of the United States. You know, if something's a flash in the pan, okay, we'll move past it. But if something's perpetual, then we will find it kind of digging in and affecting our lives and becoming kind of the new paradigm. And I think that's what we see constantly with this polling is, in fact, contrary to, I think, what a lot of people are worried about, that time is against Ukraine, and that, you know, that we need to win quickly. And of course, we do need to win quickly because Ukrainians are dying. But
absolutely, that
in fact, U.S. support has increased for Ukraine over time, and that's what the demonstration of this polling is. So
yeah, and let me add to that. I think Putin is calculating on the opposite, and I think he's dead wrong. I think you'll find that Americans will continue to support Ukraine over time.
So, I don't know, responses to that, plus maybe your impressions from Europe.
Sure. I mean, I think one very interesting thing that you pointed out as well was that actually support among Republicans is high, and even higher than support among Democrats for Ukraine, which goes totally...
Okay, I know you're going, no, that's not true. I'll show you the polling number so that you can see how it's done. But it's asked in reverse. It's not asked, do you support Ukraine? It's, what is the threat to Russia? And when you see that in that way, it changes things. Okay.
Contra to a lot of the scare stories we heard about the red wave in November, about the future Republican presidency and so on. And it's interesting for Europeans to have to reflect on the fact that the legacy of Reagan republicanism and the strong support for democracy around the world, at least Reagan republicanism in foreign policy, is still a real one. And so,
okay, by the way, I'm a Reagan Republican. I've called myself that from the very beginning. You could also classify me as faith and freedom Republican. That's another way of saying it. But Reagan Republicans see the threat that is Russia and want to do something about it. Okay, a little bit more.
And I just want to point out, Ben, just really quick, that is not the rhetoric. That is the numbers.
Yep.
Okay, that's 62% of Republicans, 58% of Democrats view Russia's invasion as a critical threat to U.S. national security. So,
okay, did you hear how he answered, or how the question was asked? So is it just a broad, do you support Ukraine, right? Or would you want peace now? Then you have that breakout. Now, if you frame it as, do you think that the Russian invasion is a critical threat to U.S. national security, you get a much more solid block. Now, let's go into the numbers of the polling here. So here is Pew Research Center, and I want to break out what populists are as opposed to what conservatives are. Okay, I'm a conservative through and through. I'm not a populist, but we look very similar in some regards. Now, populists are very, I mean, like, if you call yourself a populist, there's very little of you on the left, although there are some, and then there's a lot on the right. And how many of these populists voted for Trump? 97%. Now, what is a populist? This is the definition of a populist. A populist is a person, especially a politician, who strives to appeal to the ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by the established elite groups. If you listen to the language over the last, well, 5-7 years, the rise of Trump, they're always talking about the establishment, the establishment, the establishment. You don't hear that from other types of conservatives, but that's what populists are. That's how they think. If you look at the broad scheme of conservative to Democrat, okay, you have faith and flag conservatives. That's Christians who are conservative, who, you know, they're trying to make sense of the thou shalt nots, the absolutes, the golden rule in the scripture, and trying to live by that and love your neighbor and do just by society and that kind of thing. That is, so we have certain moral commitments, and that's 10% of the population. Then there's committed conservatives, and they're a little bit different. They're doctrinaire about conservative kind of causes, but they don't have necessarily the same moral commitment. Then you have populist right, and that's a whole different animal, and we're going to unpack how populists work in just a moment. Ambivalent right are a little bit more moderate right, and then you have stress sideliners. This is the actual independent middle. Then you have kind of a moderate left that's it's called the outsider left. The mainstay Democrats, that's somewhat similar over here to the committed conservatives, and establishment liberals are even more considered like, so establishment and committed are really parallel. They're doctrinaire about, no, this is the way to do it, no, that's the way to do it, and that's kind of, you know, they're just always going to be kind of at odds about how to see things. And then you have progressive left, which is the hardcore left. Now, generally speaking, when people talk about the far right, they kind of are talking about people like me, but they're really more these days talking about the populist right. That's the Trumpian wing. So this isn't exactly like harder or further. This is just a way of categorizing it. This is the Trumpian wing that is far more isolationist, far less involved in foreign affairs, that kind of thing, anti-establishment and all that kind of thing. That's very different than committed or faith and flag conservatives like myself. So this is The Economist magazine. Here's the growth of populism over time. 82, Bush is elected, and then when you have George W. Bush elected, and then you have Obama elected, there's this huge spike, and it's not because he's black and it's racist. It's not that. I feel so misunderstood when I hear, well, you're a Republican, so you must be racist, perpetually from CNN and MSNBC. I'm not thinking in that category at all. So but you had a big spike. What was the spike about? The push for socialized medicine, Obamacare. It had a huge backlash. And so usually populism comes as a backlash, and it always has in American history. Then you have the Tea Party movement, and then it kind of chilled out for a while, but over time something very strange happened. Now, over these same years, something strange was happening in American society. The Democrats stopped being the champion of the little guy and started being the champion of the identity, the racial identity, the LBGT identity, the fill-in-the-blank woman identity, whatever the identities were. And they started, and so the little guy got left behind, but the little guy flocked to Donald Trump. And you see this in many, many places. So that moved, there's a tectonic shift. Now, these are the populists more than conservatives, because those populists, many of them used to be Democrats. And so it's a strange thing, but they feel like they've been left behind, marginalized, out of society, whatever else. And so now they have flocked to some place where they think they can get some support. Right or wrong, that's a fair analysis, I think. Okay, let's move on to this. Now, this was a 1 year later, Americans still stand by Ukraine in February. Now, let's look at this. Most Americans support Ukraine's efforts, even a prolonged conflict. That's true. It has been true. It still is true. 39% of U.S. doing right amount to aid Ukraine. Only 28% says too much. 30% says not enough. So that's a good sign, right? Republicans are more likely than others to say they're doing too much, but which Republicans? So what we understand is that Republicans are not monolithic. Are there faith and flag conservatives doing that? Not me. Are committed conservatives? Not so much. Populists, yeah, and a little bit of the ambivalent, moderate-ish type, I think. I mean, there might be a little bit from other categories, but these are going to be the strongest that are going to be pro-Ukraine. Like I said, most of the people that I know, most of the people like me are in this category that are like, yeah, we're all behind Ukraine. What else can we get them? Okay, so let's move on and scroll down a little bit. So here's the next thing. Which would you prefer the U.S. to do in the Russian-Ukraine conflict? 22 versus 23. January of 23, 65% to 66%, 31-31. So there's barely any difference in, or like a 1% point or 1 point difference in support of Ukraine 1 year later. That's essentially nothing. Okay, parties. Now let's look at this. This is important. This was back in February, remember, in early February. Okay, which would you prefer the U.S. to do? And the choices are support Ukraine in reclaiming territory, even if prolonged, or end the conflict quickly, even if it allows Russia to keep its territory. Well, Republicans are split 53 to 41. Independents are 59. 38. So a little bit stronger here, a little bit weaker here, okay? And then Democrats are 81-16. Now, the really strange anomaly is this, because Democrats historically have been like the give peace a chance, anti-war party within the United States. I don't understand exactly why that is. If you think you understand why it is, I'd love to hear why you think it is. Okay, nearly half Republicans think they're doing too much, and that's a same thing with this thing, what's going on here. So what I want to unpack is this 41%. Let's look back at this and see if we can understand 41%. So roughly 40% of the population here is Republican-ish, at least a little Republican to hardcore Republican, right? So you have 11%, that's about 25% of that 40. And then if you add about 3 points from ambivalent, so this would go down to, so about 3 points from here and the 11 points from the populist right, if you add that together, you get 37.5%. And that's essentially that 40% or so margin that is wanting to end it quickly, even if it allows Russia to keep territory. Populists are the ones driving that. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. Okay, let me move on to one more article, and this just came out about a week ago. Americans' favorability rating of Russia sinks to new low of 9%. Okay, again, here's the highlights. Favorability of Russia down from 15% in 2022 down to 9%. 68% in U.S. view Ukraine favorably, the highest by 1 point. 56% now say Russia-Ukraine war is a critical threat to U.S. vital interests. So a majority of the country sees it that way. Okay? Opinion poll of Russia. So this is opinion of Russia. Well, what happened in 2008? And then it went down. What happened in 2014? And then it went down, right? What happened in 2022? And it's sliding down, right? So that's how that's worked out here. 2/3 of Americans view Ukraine favorably. In spite of what you hear about, well, they're corrupt or what? No, that's the populist talking. That's the Russian talking points talking through them. Okay, American opinion of Ukraine. So here we are. How do Americans in general see it? 68% see it favorably. 31% is total unfavorable. And that's a high, right? Go back over here. It's higher than what it was in 2005. Okay, now this is really interesting. Americans' perception of the Russia-Ukraine conflict as a threat to the United States. So this is overall American, not broken out by political affiliation. Russia is a threat, 56%. It's important, 36%. You add these two together, that's a pretty healthy majority, and only 8% think it's not important. And probably all of those are the populists. Favorability ratings by political party identification. Republicans and Democrats both think of Russia as 6% Republican and 6% Democrat think of Russia unfavorably. Now, what's going on there? That's really interesting when you're talking about all this. Republicans are just in Putin's back pocket or whatever. No, don't believe that narrative. Look at the polls. Now, let's look at one more. Changes in favorability rating by political party identification. 57% is down to 56%. That's not a lot. That's barely a change. 66 to 67, also barely a change. Democrats have been the ones that have gone from not a lot to a whole heck of a lot, and that's a big change. Again, I'd love to understand it, but here's what you need to understand about everything I've been telling you as far as it relates to Republicans. Similar percentage of Republicans, 62%, and Democrats, 58%. That's actually, Republicans are higher than Democrats who believe that Russia-Ukraine conflict represents a critical threat to U.S. vital interests, contrary to what DeSantis said, contrary to how Trump has been talking. 62% of Republicans and 58% of Democrats. So look at this. Who views Russian military power as a critical threat to the U.S. is a recent trend. 60% of Republicans, only 45% of Democrats. Like, this is really significant. So if you ask the question a different way, you get a different response. I think there's a lot more hardness toward Russia, at least, and maybe it's not support for Ukraine as much as anti-Russia within the Republican Party, but either way, both of those will support Ukraine. And again, if you understand the differences here, you'll understand why this number is almost this number, and you'll have a better sense of how to think about Republicans who are supporting Ukraine. We're with you. We want to support Ukraine. Help us help Ukraine. Thank you for your time. If you want to support my channel, please like or share or subscribe. You can buy me a coffee if you think that I'm doing valuable work. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.